There is a silent force that operates in the shadows of the human mind, quietly shaping the way we see ourselves and the world around us. It corrodes self-esteem, distorts our perception of personal value, and draws invisible boundaries that limit what we feel worthy to experience, to express, or even to dream of. Unlike obvious external threats, this force does not impose itself through violence or loud intimidation. It works more subtly, almost imperceptibly, through whispers of doubt and waves of discomfort. Its power lies in convincing us that we must hide, that we must shrink, that we must alter who we are in order to be accepted. This force has a name, and that name is shame. Few emotions are as misunderstood as shame. People often confuse it with guilt, but the two are profoundly different. Guilt is about behavior. It says, "I did something wrong." Guilt can be useful. It can guide us back to our values and encourage repair and growth. Shame, however, goes much deeper. It does not target what we did. It targets who we are. Its message is not, "You made a mistake." It is, "You are a mistake." And that is why shame carries such devastating power. From our earliest years, shame begins to weave itself into our sense of self. A disapproving glance from a parent, a harsh comparison to a sibling, a careless remark about our body, our voice, or our personality. In those moments, the child does not think, "They are wrong about me." Instead, they absorb the wound as truth. Something must be wrong with me. And so, authenticity is slowly sacrificed on the altar of approval. The child learns to suppress emotions, hide vulnerabilities, and adapt their identity to please others. What begins as an external criticism gradually transforms into an internal voice, an invisible judge that watches, questions, and condemns every impulse. As adults, many of us live under the weight of this inner judge without even realizing it. We silence desires before they can be spoken. We censor thoughts before they can be shared. We avoid risks, creativity, and vulnerability because we fear exposure will confirm our worst belief, that we are unworthy. And so, shame becomes not just an emotion but a system of control, a cage without walls that keeps us from living authentically. But here is the truth. Shame is not an eternal fact about who you are. It is not your essence. It is a system you learned, and what has been learned can be unlearned. Today, in this video, we will expose the hidden gears of shame, understand where it comes from, how it operates, and most importantly, how to dismantle its grip so that it never controls you again. To begin breaking free from shame, we first need to understand exactly what it is and how it differs from the emotion it is most often confused with, guilt. At first glance, guilt and shame may appear to be the same, but in truth, they operate on entirely different levels of the human psyche. Guilt is tied to our behavior. It arises when we recognize that something we have done has hurt someone, violated a value, or fallen short of what we expect of ourselves. In this sense, guilt can be healthy. It functions almost like an emotional traffic signal, pointing out that a correction is needed. Its message is clear: you did something wrong. Fix it. Learn from it. Grow. Guilt, when processed properly, allows for repair, accountability, and deeper connection. Shame, on the other hand, goes far beyond behavior. It does not merely suggest that we did something bad. It insists that we are bad. Where guilt preserves our dignity, shame strips it away. Where guilt says, "You made a mistake," shame whispers, "You are a mistake." This seemingly subtle difference has devastating consequences. Guilt challenges an action, but shame poisons identity. It infiltrates the very core of how we see ourselves, convincing us that our flaws are not something we carry. They are who we are. This is why shame is so destructive. It corrodes self-esteem, distorts self-perception, and transforms every imperfection into evidence of personal worthlessness. A missed opportunity becomes proof that we are inadequate. A rejection becomes confirmation that we are unlovable. A mistake becomes validation that we are fundamentally broken. Over time, this creates what psychologists call a toxic identity, where the person no longer separates their behaviors from their essence. They stop saying, "I failed at this," and instead, "I am a failure." From this toxic soil, a host of destructive patterns grow. Perfectionism takes root, because if you are convinced you are flawed, you feel the need to hide it beneath flawless performance. Procrastination emerges, because the fear of being exposed as inadequate paralyzes you. People-pleasing develops, because you believe acceptance must be constantly earned and never freely given. Even self-destructive behaviors can follow, as a way to cope with or mask the unbearable weight of self-rejection. What makes shame particularly insidious is that it often hides beneath the surface. Unlike guilt, which can be rationally examined and resolved, shame seeps into the unconscious, into posture, tone of voice, body language, and memory. It manifests in lowered eyes, stiffened shoulders, avoidance of vulnerability. And because it becomes so deeply woven into identity, many people do not even realize they are carrying shame. They believe its voice is their own, but it isn't. Shame is not truth, it is conditioning. And recognizing this difference is the first step in dismantling its power. Shame does not appear out of nowhere. It is not something we are born with. In fact, no child enters the world believing there is something wrong with them. Infants arrive in a natural state of authenticity, expressing needs, emotions, and impulses freely, without hesitation, without censorship. They cry when they are hungry, laugh when they are joyful, and reach for what they desire without questioning whether they deserve it. But this original state rarely lasts unchallenged. Very early in life, the seeds of shame are planted, often by the very people entrusted with our care. It usually begins with moments that appear small, even harmless. A disapproving look when a child cries too loudly. A subtle comparison between siblings, with one praised while the other feels diminished. A sharp comment about curiosity being annoying, or an exaggerated punishment for what was merely an attempt to explore. Each of these incidents may seem trivial, but for a child, they carry an unspoken message. If I am myself, I will not be loved. Slowly, the child learns to link authenticity with rejection, expression with danger, vulnerability with shame. To survive emotionally, the child adapts. They begin to suppress emotions labeled as ugly or unacceptable: anger, sadness, frustration. They start shaping themselves to meet the expectations of parents, teachers, or peers. They learn that being spontaneous is risky, that showing their true feelings leads to punishment or withdrawal of affection. And so, a psychic division is born. The child hides their true self and begins constructing a false self, a mask carefully designed to win approval, to avoid rejection, and to secure a sense of belonging. The author John Bradshaw described this process in his work Healing the Shame That Binds You. He explained that this false self is a survival strategy, a way for children to protect themselves from the unbearable pain of feeling unworthy. But there is a cost. Over time, the mask becomes heavy. It creates a deep internal void, a constant feeling of inadequacy, and an endless search for validation from the outside world. By the time these children grow into adults, many have forgotten who they truly were before they adapted. They censor themselves so automatically that they no longer even realize they are hiding. Worse still, they often pass this pattern forward, judging, criticizing, or shaming others with the same harshness once used against them. Shame becomes not just a private burden, but a cycle repeated in families, relationships, and society at large. Understanding these origins matters deeply, because when we see shame not as proof of our unworthiness, but as a learned response to early experiences, we unlock the possibility of healing. What was once implanted can be uprooted, and this recognition marks the beginning of freedom. Once shame has taken root in childhood, it does not remain a passing emotion. Over time, it transforms into something far more powerful, a system of internal surveillance. It becomes like a hidden judge who lives inside the mind, watching every thought, every impulse, every action. This judge does not guide with wisdom, nor does it correct with compassion. Instead, it condemns, humiliates, and restricts. And the most damaging part of all is that this judge feels inseparable from the self. Many people do not realize they are listening to shame. They believe they are listening to their own conscience. This is what makes shame so destructive. True conscience seeks to align us with our values, to protect integrity and relationships. Shame, however, is not conscience. It is conditioning. It masquerades as reason, but its language is fear. It says things like, "Don't speak up, they'll laugh at you. Don't show that side of yourself. No one will accept it. Don't try, you'll fail anyway." These voices operate so subtly, so automatically, that people obey without question, as though breaking free would be unthinkable. The French philosopher Michel Foucault once described how power operates most effectively when it is internalized. Instead of needing constant external control, society teaches individuals to monitor themselves, to police their own thoughts and behaviors. Shame functions in exactly this way. It is a prison without visible walls, a system of control that keeps people small without the need for anyone else to enforce it. The consequences of living under this inner judge are profound. Desires are repressed because they might be judged. Creativity is stifled because it might look foolish. Vulnerability is avoided because it could be mocked or rejected. The result is a life lived in fear, a fear of failure, a fear of exposure, a fear of never being enough. People begin to shrink themselves, presenting only a carefully managed version of who they are, a version that feels acceptable but never fully authentic. Perhaps you have felt this yourself. The nervousness before sharing an idea, the embarrassment after revealing something personal, the sudden urge to withdraw after being vulnerable. These are all signs of the internal judge at work. And while its grip can feel absolute, it is important to remember, this voice is not truth. It is not your essence. It is the echo of past criticisms, past rejections, past fears that were implanted long ago. Dismantle shame. We must first learn to recognize when this judge is speaking. Only then can we begin to separate our true self from the conditioned voice that has tried to control us for so long. Shame is powerful not only because of the wounds it leaves, but also because of the way it hides. Unlike other emotions that announce themselves with intensity, like anger, fear, or joy, shame prefers disguise. It rarely appears openly. Instead, it creeps into our thoughts and behaviors in ways that feel natural, even reasonable. This is why so many people live under its control without realizing it. To break free, the first step is learning to recognize its voice. Shame often speaks in the language of absolutes. It doesn't say, "You made a mistake on that project." It whispers, "You are a failure." It doesn't say, "That person rejected your idea." It hisses, "Nobody will ever take you seriously." These are not simple criticisms of behavior. They are attacks on identity. If you find yourself repeating phrases like, "I am not good enough," "I always ruin everything," or "I'll never be accepted for who I am," then shame is already at work. These words may feel like your own, but they are echoes of conditioning, not reflections of truth. Another way shame reveals itself is through patterns of avoidance. People often believe they are shy, unmotivated, or simply cautious, when in reality they are retreating out of fear of exposure. Shame convinces us that if we share an idea, take a creative risk, or show vulnerability, we will be unmasked as unworthy. So we hold back. We procrastinate. We hide. And while these strategies may protect us from immediate discomfort, they also prevent us from living fully and authentically. Shame can also manifest in perfectionism. If you constantly feel the need to prove yourself, to avoid mistakes at any cost, or to live up to impossible standards, this too may be shame in disguise. It tells you that flaws are unacceptable and that worthiness must be earned. Similarly, shame often fuels self-sabotage. Those moments when you procrastinate until it's too late, abandon a goal just as success is near, or numb yourself with distractions or addictions. Beneath each of these behaviors lies the same painful belief: I am not enough. Finally, shame often projects outward. The internal harshness we direct at ourselves can spill onto others. We criticize, judge, or demand perfection from them as a way to cope with our own unresolved feelings of inadequacy. Recognizing this pattern is difficult but essential, because once we see it, we can understand that shame is not truth, it is a wound. Learning to identify the voice of shame is painful, but it is also liberating. The moment you see it clearly, you begin to separate your authentic self from the conditioning that has held you captive. Awareness is the first step toward freedom. If shame is a voice that tells us we are unworthy, then the antidote to shame is not more judgment, not more striving, and not more perfection. The antidote is self-compassion. At first, this may sound too simple or even too soft, especially in a world that often equates toughness with strength. But in reality, self-compassion is one of the most courageous acts a human being can practice. Because it goes directly against the voice of shame. Self-compassion is not the same as blind indulgence. Nor is it about pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. It is not repeating empty affirmations in the mirror or ignoring our flaws. True self-compassion is about facing ourselves honestly, our pain, our wounds, our mistakes, without abandoning or attacking ourselves in the process. It is about treating ourselves with the same care and respect we would offer to someone we love. Even when we fall short, psychologist Kristen Neff, one of the leading voices in this field, explains that self-compassion works as a powerful form of emotional regulation. When we practice it, our nervous system shifts from threat mode into safety mode. Instead of constantly being on guard, fearing judgment or rejection, we begin to feel safe enough to grow, to try, to fail, and to try again. In other words, compassion creates the very conditions where authentic progress becomes possible. Practicing self-compassion begins with a change in perspective. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" we begin to ask, "Who taught me to see myself this way?" Instead of believing, "I am broken," we begin to realize, "I learned to see myself as broken." That difference may seem subtle, but it changes everything. Shame tells us that we are the problem. Self-compassion helps us see that shame is the problem. This shift allows us to respond to mistakes and failures differently. Instead of spiraling into self-destruction when we stumble, we begin to accept that stumbling is part of being human. We learn to treat ourselves as we would treat a child who has fallen, not with cruelty or dismissal, but with patience, gentleness, and encouragement. Over time, this practice begins to loosen the grip of shame. Its voice does not disappear overnight, but it loses its dominance. It no longer defines our identity. Self-compassion is not weakness. It is not laziness. It is the quiet strength of refusing to abandon yourself. And it is this strength that begins to break the cycle of shame, opening the door to healing, authenticity, and freedom. Shame survives in secrecy. It thrives in silence, in the corners of the mind where no light is allowed to reach. It feeds on what is hidden, on the stories we refuse to tell, on the memories we push down and bury. This is why shame feels so powerful. It convinces us that if anyone were to see the parts of ourselves we conceal, we would be rejected, unloved, or abandoned. But here is the truth: shame only holds power in the dark. The moment we bring it into the light of awareness, its grip begins to weaken. Bringing shame into the light does not mean broadcasting our wounds to the entire world. It begins privately, with honesty. It starts by naming the feelings we have avoided, by telling ourselves the truth about our pain. Journaling, therapy, or simply speaking out loud the thoughts that once remained unspoken can begin this process. By doing so, we take back ownership of our story instead of letting shame control it. The act of naming what once felt unspeakable is itself an act of liberation. For some, the next step is sharing with a trusted person, a friend, a partner, a mentor, someone who can listen without judgment. This kind of vulnerability is terrifying, but it is also transformative. Because in the very moment we expect rejection, we often find connection. And nothing dismantles shame faster than realizing that the parts of ourselves we believed made us unlovable are, in fact, what allow others to love us more deeply. It is important to remember that bringing shame into the light is not about erasing it completely. Shame may still try to whisper its old lies, especially in moments of vulnerability. But once you recognize its voice for what it is, a conditioned echo, not the truth, you no longer need to obey it. The lies lose their power. The prison doors swing open. Living in the light of authenticity means allowing yourself to be fully human, to make mistakes, to feel deeply, to change your mind, to be vulnerable and imperfect, and to know that none of this diminishes your worth. In fact, it is in embracing your humanity that you discover your true strength. Shame insists that if you reveal yourself, you will be unloved. But the opposite is true. When you reveal yourself honestly, both to yourself and to others, you create space for real love, including self-love, to grow. And that is the beginning of a life lived with courage, authenticity, and freedom. Shame is a master of disguise. It makes itself appear like truth, convincing us that our worth is conditional, that our flaws are fatal, and that our authentic selves must be hidden in order to belong. For years, maybe decades, we carry its voice within us, mistaking it for our own. But through this journey, we have uncovered something vital. Shame is not who you are. It is not your identity. It is a learned system, implanted through early experiences, reinforced by fear, and sustained in silence. And because it was learned, it can be unlearned. That we began by understanding what shame really is, an attack not on behavior, but on identity. We traced its roots back to childhood, to the moments when approval was withheld, when comparisons cut deep, when authenticity was punished rather than nurtured. We saw how shame transforms into an inner judge, a relentless critic that polices our thoughts and limits our freedom. We learned how to recognize its voice in the words we repeat to ourselves, in the patterns of avoidance, perfectionism, and self-sabotage that hold us back. And then we explored the antidote, self-compassion, not indulgence, not denial, but the courageous act of meeting our wounds with patience, gentleness, and respect. Finally, we discovered the power of bringing shame into the light, where it can no longer thrive. This is the work of liberation, not the elimination of every trace of shame, but the refusal to let it define you. The truth is that you are not your mistakes, not your failures, not the distorted image someone else projected onto you. You are a whole, worthy, capable human being, and every step you take toward authenticity, every moment you choose compassion over criticism, every time you speak truth instead of silence, you weaken the grip of shame and strengthen the freedom of your true self. Now the choice is yours. Will you continue carrying the old lies of shame, or will you begin living with courage, truth, and authenticity? If this message has resonated with you, I invite you to declare it in the comments with a simple phrase: I choose to live with truth. Let your words encourage someone else who is still trapped in silence. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more content like this, subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking this path of healing and self-discovery together. Shame may try to whisper again, but from this moment forward, you know its voice. And once you know, you are no longer controlled. This is your freedom.